start the main session and I hand over to Verity. But just to let you know, this session is being recorded. So if later on you want to go back to refer to anything, or if you have any colleagues that couldn't make it along this morning, that will be available on our website through our Centre for Learning. So we'll upload it there for you. But this Statutory Code webinar is for landlords with over 1,000 homes, and it's going to focus on their annual complaints, performance and service improvement report. I'm Anthea. I'm one of the sector learning and development leads at the Housing Ombudsman Service. You might have spoken to me before. I may have booked you onto the webinar, so it's great to see so many of you here today. We've got a really big group, so really excited about that. Before I hand over to Verity, who's going to lead the session for us this morning, only a couple of points from me. If I could please ask that, I think you've all done this already actually, so that's great, but if I could just ask that you make sure that you're on mute if you haven't already, that would be really helpful. And I've already mentioned the webinar is going to be recorded. And just to mention as well, before we kind of start the session, at the end of the webinar, I'm going to pop a link to a short evaluation form in the chat. Really appreciate it if you could please fill that out for us. It should only take a few minutes. It's not too many questions, but would really appreciate your feedback to help us shape the sessions in the future. So to make sure you can get the most out of them. But it looks like most of us are here now, so thank you very much for joining us, and I will hand over to you, Verity.
Morning, everyone. It's lovely to have you with us today for our third webinar, focusing on specific parts of the complaint handling code and the requirements that you're all following, hopefully, just to make sure that everybody is fully aware of what is required with the new code, but then also to be able to give you some food for thought depending on your role, but also to share some of the practices that we've had. As Anthea said, we are going to be recording the session. You can use the chat function within here, within the teams, to be able to ask any additional questions that you might have. We'll make every effort to get through all of those questions, but with a big group we do find that there are some that we can't answer, and then we always provide those responses after the session has been completed. So please, if we don't get through to you, your particular question, then don't worry, we will provide that response to you. Oh, forgive me, there we go. So as Anthea has already said, the purpose of today is to share with you information about the annual complaint handling and service improvement report. A very long name for a requirement. So throughout this, I'm going to call it the annual publication because I can't bring myself to keep repeating such a long phrase. So that's what I mean by the annual publication. So as I'm sure you already know, any of the publications that you're providing on your websites to your residents are a really brilliant opportunity for you to share the work that you're doing, to be really open, to be transparent, and show how you are being accountable to residents. A really important part of the work, which I'm sure that you all recognise and want to make the most of. Obviously, with consumer regulation coming in and the consumer standards, transparency, accountability, really, really vital, and this is a great opportunity for you to demonstrate that. In terms of what's included in the publication, it can be a great place to share any of those achievements or challenges that you've had during the year, a great place to give the context of the work that you've been doing during the year, and again, how those complaints that you've received have been used to make changes, to consider different approaches, or perhaps to celebrate, well, actually, yes, we had complaints about these issues, we've made significant changes to those. When you are providing the information, the data that you're providing, so any of the themes, trends, volumes, it must include the detail of all complaints made about services, and very specifically directly or indirectly. So if you have a managing agent providing housing services to a scheme, if you have a contractor that in place to be providing repair services, those are all included. And that's what we will be expecting to have included in the report. We're also highlighting that there needs to be a reference to any relevant findings or publications about the individual landlord by the Ombudsman, and that it must be published on the website, which I assume everyone has, in their relevant sections for them to highlight those to residents. It does also need to be accompanied, with a statement from the governing body. Now, it's entirely up to you how you put that into the report. It could be a separate statement, but it does need to be included. And then highlighting that this report, as I'm sure you're aware, will be used by the Ombudsman to monitor compliance with the Complaint Handling Code. So what are the key elements for the annual publication? So firstly, the annual self-assessment, which I am sure you are very much in the process of doing if you haven't completed it already. It will be required for submission for yourselves, larger landlords with more than 1,000 properties, by the end of June. That also has the governing body's response that provides assurance that that self-assessment has been reviewed and scrutinised and challenged, and that the governing body is satisfied that that is a reflection of the organisation's approach to complaint handling and its compliance. Analysis of complaints performance, any findings of non-compliance against the complaint handling code, any service improvements which have been made as a result of complaints. Don't underestimate how important that is. As I've said, it's about openness and accountability and celebrating where you have made changes. The next two elements you'll see are highlighted. This won't apply to all landlords, and some landlords will have one and not the other, and so that's why they are highlighted. So the Housing Ombudsman publishes an annual performance report for landlords every year where more than 5 determinations have been made during that financial year. They're published in the autumn and they're held on our website. So if your organisation does have one, we would expect to see that being included. And any other relevant reports by the Ombudsman relating to the landlord's practices. So that could include a paragraph 49 special learning report into an organisation, publication of a severe maladministration, or any findings which are highlighted of non-maladministration, depending on the arrangements. So we've had quite a lot of queries about analysis of complaints. Different organisations will have very different approaches and will have different experiences, different insights from their data. In terms of what we actually require to be included, you can see here volumes of complaints received over the year. You'll be reporting that as part of your tenant satisfaction measures anyway, so that should be available and you should be able to provide that. We are expecting themes and trends of the complaints received. That is what's meant by the qualitative aspect of the report. So that would be for yourselves to be talking about the themes, the trends. We'd always encourage organisations to consider the types of complaints, what service areas, and then any of the root cause analysis which I've suggested could be a consideration for you. The other area which we will expect to see in the report is the types of complaints that were made but not accepted, so that those can be reviewed. It's important that those are being put in. Now, I do know that there have been some queries where, well, actually, what do we do if we haven't collected them? We'd expect to see that explained in the report, and then an overview of how that will be rectified moving forwards. Some other areas that you may wish to consider that we've had suggestions from or have seen in our work. So root cause analysis, but getting to the real nub of the problem. What is it that is driving those complaints? Or indeed, what's driving residents to complain about those issues? Is there something that you could be looking at in terms of managing expectations, communicating? It doesn't always have to be that there is service failure, as I'm sure you will know. Benchmarking. There's lots of opportunities to do benchmarking. I'm sure many of you are members of benchmarking clubs or local clubs that you are meeting with. In terms of the opportunities that you can share there, it doesn't just have to be facts and figures. It can also be qualitative analysis, discussions that have had during the year, Really, it's whatever you feel would be beneficial and useful for yourselves and also for residents. We're also highlighting that this is a great place that you could include any wider work which has been undertaken. So resident scrutiny work, you may have done a deep dive or a review with your residents about complaint handling or elements of complaint handling. Here would be a great place to share that work and how that has informed the decisions which have been made. We know that some organisations like to do peer assessments, so cross organisation to be able to see where there is opportunity for learning. That's another example that could be included in the report. Or if you've conducted any independent reviews. That doesn't mean that the whole report has to be published, just explaining that that has occurred and how that will be used moving forward. So moving to the other elements, findings of non-compliance with the code. We have had some queries about what does this refer to and what the expectations are. So these are reports or findings issued under duty to monitor, which no organisation will have yet because we started at the 1st of April. So you don't need to worry about that one until next year. But any complaint handling failure orders that you may have received during the year, so our type 1 complaint handling failure orders on individual cases, any of those which have been issued for delays to providing information to the Ombudsman, so our type 2 complaint handling failure orders, and any made for non-compliance with orders, as well as any previous type 3 complaint handling failure orders, which would at the time have related to failure to meet the obligations of the scheme. So they are all need, excuse me, so they will need to be included for that financial year. We'd also expect to see any findings of maladministration and complaint handling included. For that, it doesn't need to be the full report. It would be needing to show the number of those, and generally we've seen that landlords are including commentary about what they've done as a result of those, but that is what is specified for the findings of non-compliance with the code. As I've said already, the annual report from the Ombudsman, it's published every year where there's more than 5 determinations. They are on our website. These are published at the moment, generally in the autumn. We are looking at our cycle of publications because obviously we do recognise that landlords will want to have that information as early as possible to refer to. So they will be changing over time, but this year's will be published later on after your submissions date, so you can refer to the previous ones which are already there for you to refer to. As I've already said, any other relevant reports doesn't apply to everyone, but these are the things that which we would expect to see. For anyone who is in attendance, you can see these are much more detailed responses to some of the frequently asked questions on our website, and you'll be able to see the link there because we will be sharing these slides as we go. As I already mentioned, really important to share service improvements as a result of complaints. It's something that I'm sure you will have seen has become a bit of a it's been something that we've been really working with landlords to do. So our severe maladministration report that was published yesterday, we included comments and shared information about what landlords had been doing as a result of those in their learning statement. And I've just given some examples here for you to think about as some examples. We're not prescriptive about how you provide that information. I know that you said we did has been something that landlords have used many times to communicate with residents, and that is still in practice. But some examples here about the way that that has been shared and providing that information that is passed through to the residents so that they are aware of those. I'm not suggesting that every organisation has to have a significant learning. Just be open and honest about what the work is and how that has been informed. So some food for thought there. These ones have been taken from some of the learning statements that you can see on our website. We have them on our severe maladministrations. They're also included in our special learning reports, you can see quite extensively the types of comments and learning that landlords have taken and the way that they've communicated that. So some food for you there. More widely, when you are preparing your publications, just some key things to be really thinking about, particularly as you are developing the report and depending on your involvement as you are concluding that report and preparing it for publication. Be really clear, does it include all of the key elements which I've highlighted today? This is in the section 8 of Section 8 of the Complaint Handling Code. It is detailed there, so you can refer to the code, you can refer to the guidance that we have. Does it include all of the information? It's really important that any data is accurate, reliable and repeatable. We have shared lots and lots of findings related to data quality, poor record keeping, information sharing. You can see that in our knowledge and information management report. And I really want to highlight that in our consultation, one of the key pieces of feedback from residents was a real sense of mistrust and scepticism about landlords and their published figures. That's not to say that we have that same view, but I just want to highlight that from the participants who took part in the consultation in autumn, that was a really big piece of feedback that we took. So really encourage organisations to be very clear that that information is correct and it is accurate. And if you are doing any assurance activities, so I've already mentioned having residents scrutinise the report or support on the report, sharing what that is to begin to rebuild that trust with any residents that do have that view, I'd really encourage you to be considering. I've already mentioned the opportunity to do benchmarking. That is there. You can also refer to any of our spotlight reports. You can see all of the landlord reports. There is information on our website to support you in that if you're not part of a benchmarking club, depending on your own organisation. I've mentioned service improvements. So have you set those out clearly and about the changes which have been completed? And then also those successes or challenges that I've talked about that residents should really be aware of. I'm not just meaning, you know, in terms of volumes of complaints or things like that, but you know, do they need to know that actually it's really difficult to recruit and retain contractors? You know, there's so much that's happening in the sector right now. Do consider including any big picture challenges or things that you think residents should be aware of that's going to inform them about the services moving forward. And then lastly, how can you include the resident's voice? That will depend on your own arrangements. You may have transactional surveys that you can refer to. You may want to include information about wider surveys that you're completing. We don't require that you include the tenant satisfaction measures, but you are free to include anything that like that should you wish to do so. So how can you include those in your report? So once you've completed your report and you are completely happy with it, it's been approved, and you are potentially thinking about design or features, just some other areas that you might want to consider. So we all know that accessibility and awareness is really, really important. For accessibility, be considering our alternative formats which are needed. The code really encourages organisations and requires organisations to consider the needs of the residents. I'm sure that you all have a huge amount of insights and information about your residents, what languages they may need, if there are alternative formats which are needed. So for example, if you know that a large proportion of your residents speak another language, do you want to actually plan to have those already as an alternative? If you're not, just be mindful of any timescales to provide any individually requested translations. I will be honest, that has been something that's caught me out in the past, even here at the Ombudsman, that actually sometimes it does take far longer than you're anticipating. So just be mindful of that. I will highlight similarly that I did in the self-assessment webinar, beware of links. it's absolutely fine to have links on your website. We'd encourage that to make it easy for people to find and access information. Link breaking, links not working, links linking to the wrong documents. It's something that we've all experienced, I'm afraid. So just that sort of friendly neighbourhood reminder about website links. I think we all need to remember that one. Once you're satisfied that you've got your accessible version or versions, depending on your organisation, then we'd encourage you to be thinking about awareness. So the code requires that it is published on the website, which as large landlords, you will all have, I'm sure, your own website. Some of our smaller organisations don't, because they are between sort of 5 and 10 properties. But then really asking organisations to go further and think about, what about your hard to reach groups, those residents that you are not able to access the website, perhaps that you know about. How could you reach those residents and contact them? Beyond your residents, think about your staff and any of your stakeholders. It's part of embedding a positive complaint handling culture that all of your teams are aware of the accessibility awareness and understand the report. It will be for you to consider how you are raising that awareness, and you may want to think about any local partners that you have to inform them, to engage with them. That would be for you to know your own stakeholders. Some opportunities for sharing this information that I'm sure is already springing to everyone's minds. You can think about your own publications, wider publications, newsletters, or any meetings that you might have. Some suggestions which have come up through discussions. Some of the smaller organisations are considering holding town hall events or scheme meetings to actually host those and discuss those reports. Now, as large organisations, that may not be practical for you, but it's something you may want to consider if you've got particular schemes who are that you are able to do that. Then that might be something that you want to think about. We've also heard some ideas around podcasting. So one organisation that I met with, I'm just highlighting because I happened to meet with them, they were talking about doing a podcast to discuss with residents how they'd actually scrutinise the report, which I thought was something that was really interesting. A bit of an alternative idea that you might want to think about. And I know that many organisations have had or have resident editors or resident readers to support development of the report. I'm not suggesting that every organisation should consider this, but there is an organisation that has shared that they're planning to do their report entirely by video. That's their plan. We've yet to see it because obviously they haven't had to submit yet, but you know, that is something that is being considered. So just some thoughts for you on that. Also highlighting today that we do have our free online learning module. Apologies, that was said very, very badly, which we have published. We have only been sharing it, actually shared it today on LinkedIn for anyone that's available, that is on LinkedIn and following us. There is information about the not only the report, but also self-assessments, the code itself, and some of the key scenarios that we know that landlords have been raising. So service requests versus complaints, and then also timescales. So I'm afraid that is a shameless plug for you to go and consider signing up to do that if that is of benefit to you. In terms of guidance and support that is available to you, we have our complaint handling code key topic page, which hosts a significant amount now of information, and we're intending to continue building that for you to be able to have additional information. If anybody in the room is a member of a governing body, so the board or executive committee, or is considering or is a member responsible for complaints, we have specific guidance that's available to them to be looking at that information at the board level. I've already mentioned some of the spotlight reports. So we have got our knowledge and information management reports, and also our attitudes, rights and respect report, which has been recently published. So you may want to refer to those. There is learning that can be taken across the sector. I'm sure you've already seen them, but you know, do consider those. We publish quarterly complaint handling failure order reports. Again, they're available on our website. They will be able to share with you any of the key learning and intervention that we have taken, but also really positive work that has been done by organisations to resolve some of the challenges that they have. We'll be publishing our Q4 report mid to end of June, so that will be available. I've mentioned already performance reports and the special learning reports for different landlords. And then if there is anything that you are still not sure about or that you want to query, we have the Duty to Monitor team. So I'm the head of Duty to Monitor, and I should have said that at the start, but it's a new role for me, so apologies. I'm now the head of Duty to Monitor. I am joined by my colleagues who will be answering the questions for you, which have been pre-submitted, but you can contact us using our compliance inbox. We aim to respond to all of our queries within 5 working days, and whilst we have been responding to almost 90% of those within time, if there is something that's more complicated, then we may need to get back to you a little bit later, but we will keep you updated, so the team are there to help you. Keeping in touch, I'm sure many of you are already following us potentially on LinkedIn. If you're on LinkedIn, I hope that you are. I'm sure you are signed up to our newsletter on our website. And if you are using, I can't call it X, I'm sorry, it will be forever Twitter to me. If you are on Twitter, we are on Twitter, and you are very welcome to follow us on Twitter. We will share information there. And then finally, we are going to open for the pre-submitted questions, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen and ask Anthea if you can spotlight my question masters, please. I've just seen just one of the questions in the chat about will we be answering chat questions? Yes, we will. We will make every effort to get through all of those questions today. We are a really large group here, so if we don't, then we will take those away and make sure that we do provide those after the session. So I will hand over to, is it Danny? Are you first?
Yeah, thank you, Verity. So I'm going to be asking the pre-submitted questions today, and my colleagues Bethan and Maria are going to answer them. We have had quite a few similar questions, so if I don't ask your question, it may be just that we've had a question the same or very similar. And if we don't get to the end of all the pre-submitted questions, again, like Verity said, these will be answered and circulated as well, along with the chat questions. So the first question that we've got is to meet our board cycle before the submission deadline of 30th of June and present the report to the member responsible for complaints. I'm required to have my report ready for 7th of May. With the webinars only being made available in May, will it be acceptable if you have followed the written guidance within the code FAQs for the first year/submission on what is expected from the report, and learn from any feedback and the webinars for the next submission in 2025?
Yeah, so in terms of the annual complaints and service improvement report, we're not prescriptive on the format, as Verity touched on, and there is no template for landlords to complete. The only requirement that it contains the following information: so the annual self-assessment against the code to ensure the complaint handling policy remains in line with its requirements. This is an assessment of the landlord's complaint policy against the statutory code. Landlords will then be expected to include their 2023 and 2024 performance against the code in place at that time, covering the following: so a qualitative and quantitative analysis of the landlord's complaint handling performance. This must also include a summary of any findings of non-compliance with this code by the Ombudsman, service improvements made as a result of the learning from complaints, and any annual report about the landlord's performance from the Ombudsman. It will then be up to the individual landlords to decide how to ensure all the points are covered in the report. However, where we identify any particular examples of good practice, we'll look to share via our Centre for Learning. So the annual complaints performance and service improvement report, such a mouthful, must be reported to the landlord's governing body or equivalent and published on the section of the website relating to complaints.
Lovely, thank you, Bethan. So our next question, in terms of publishing on the website, we'll be sharing our self-assessment in full. However, do we need to publish a copy of the whole complaints annual report, or can it be extracts of the report?
Hi, so where the landlord has a website, I will say the annual publication, because it's such a long word, will need to be published in full along with the self-assessment. This report is an externally published document rather than just an internal review. So when publishing, as we've highlighted, landlords may wish to consider how it's raising awareness, taking steps to improve accessibility for the report to its residents. Landlords are best placed to understand the needs of their residents, and they can look to use insights to ensure that they're offering a variety of formats, languages and ways that these can be assessed. Landlords may also wish to consider an easy read version of the annual publication for their residents, which just pulls out the key information.
Thank you, Maria. Are we okay to create the report in a web page format to better support the use of accessibility tools? Or is a document required?
Yeah, so similarly to before, we're not prescriptive about the format or the layout of the report. We simply require that a full copy or version is published on the landlord's website. However, the landlord should also consider accessibility for residents who don't have access to the website and other formats that the report can be made readily available for those groups of residents. In our submission form, we'll be asking for a link to the relevant documents and can accept a web page link as the report. So that's fine.
Lovely, thank you. So can the comments from the governing body on the report be captured and reported outside of the report? For example, within cabinet minutes, and then signposting tenants or housing ombudsman to this? Or does it need to be specifically included in the report before publication?
So when publishing the annual publication, landlords must include the governing body's response to the report. The purpose of the governing body's response to the self-assessment is to provide assurance that the self-assessment is a true reflection of the landlord's complaint handling. In terms of formatting, the landlord may wish to include this in the comment section, a forward to the report, or as a standalone document. It is worth noting that if it cannot be provided at the time of publication, then it just needs to be referenced within the self-assessment as non-compliant under that relevant provision, with confirmation of when the governing body's response will be provided. This should also be confirmed within the report if the state is known. From there, we will review each report of non-compliance to assess it on a case-by-case basis.
Lovely, thank you, Maria. So the next one is, what if, due to deadlines with getting your report to the governing body, you establish on the training something that hasn't been included in your report this year, as it's already been written, as our corporate complaint year was April to March? So what are the consequences on organisations?
Yeah, so if there are any elements of the annual report that the landlord has not collected or recorded relevant information for publication, this should be stated in the self-assessment with an explanation for the reasons and the intended action that the landlord will take to achieve compliance, as with any other provisions of the code. This should also be set out in the annual publication for transparency to residents. We'll examine all submissions and the reasons and any timescales for resolving any non-compliance to consider these on a case-by-case basis. We'll take into account any timings of guidance and requirements as a part of this. It is worth also noting that if we do identify any missing information that is not highlighted, we will be contacting the landlord to notify them of any findings, and they'll be required to take action such as updating the report and resubmitting that information to us directly.
Can I just jump in on that one just before we move on that one? Thank you, Bethan, that's really helpful. Just to explain, because I know it's been something that I've seen in the chat as we've come through. One of the things just to clarify is that the Ombudsman's legal obligation is to monitor that compliance with the code, and we are absolutely aware and anticipating that there will be instances where landlords, for example, they may not have been recording the complaints that they haven't accepted. You know, over the previous financial year, we recognise that that is a new requirement, and we would consider that on a case-by-case basis. But we're anticipating that there will be organisations who are simply unable to provide that information. They haven't planned to provide that information, and that we would review that. That would still mean that that would be non-compliant, but we would be very unlikely to take action on that specific provision alone, because, as we've said, we would be looking at the timing of the publications and the guidance. What we really want to highlight is that the most important thing is that if information that is now required isn't available, it's absolutely to state that, be clear and transparent, and then move forward, so that it's not a case of that we're expecting to see it in every single one, because we're not. So I just wanted to kind of give that assurance to you as you're doing it, rather than worrying and panicking that information hasn't been collected. Just be open, be transparent, we'll consider it, move on. Thanks, Bethan.
Thank you, Bethan and Verity. So the next question is there going to be a template or more detailed guidance on what is expected from the annual report following our initial submissions?
So we're not prescriptive about the layout. So currently there won't be a template or a set format for the report. All that we ask is that the landlords ensure themselves that they know what information is required, and they cover all of that within the report. As Verity as Lovely just said, if there is elements that cannot be reported on, then obviously they're the parts that we need to be made aware of, and obviously we will work on a case-by-case basis with the landlords to review these. The most important thing is the governing body's response. I know we've touched on this quite a bit, but again, if the governing body response cannot be provided at the time or cannot be signed off because you are waiting for the meeting with them, again, then please let us know within the self-assessment, and we can look at it at that point.
Lovely, thank you. And then another question is, whilst it is understood that the 30th of June deadline is to align with TSMs, as a local authority, this is very challenging owing to both governance and complaints from March that may not reach their code timescales until late in April. Is this deadline something that the Ombudsman are aware of and willing to reconsider?
So for the publication, we do ask that the reporting period is aligned with the TSMs, you are correct, and we encourage landlords to provide any additional context to the figures published. For example, a landlord could include a clarification note confirming the date the analysis was completed or the number of complaints that they still have open at the time of reporting. And we are aware that not all complaints will be closed down to fully report. As long as the landlords are inputting all the information they have, then we will take that information.
Lovely, thank you. And then just the last one from the same landlord here. The code states in 8.1 that any annual report about the landlord's performance from the Ombudsman, these reports aren't typically received until later the following year. Is the Ombudsman planning to produce these earlier for inclusion within the landlord's annual report?
So I know Verity touched on this in the presentation. So we are aware that obviously the HOS reports only come out October time. So for this year, we would ask if the landlord does have one of those reports to use the previous year's findings, and moving forward, as Verity said, this is something that we will look at to kind of align with when we need the annual reports and the self-assessment submissions.
Lovely, thank you. And then another question that we've had is, what constitutes non-compliance? Is it not being able to answer yes to all sections and subsections? We have, over the years of doing the self-assessment, sometimes stated that we were non-compliant, as several complaints were responded to outside of the complaint timescales. However, this is one part of one section. Therefore, having guidelines as to what non-compliance looks like would be really helpful.
So if the landlord answers no to any section on the self-assessment, this does mean that it is non-compliant with the code for that particular provision. The landlord is required to provide commentary as to why it's unable to comply and how it has met the intentions of the code in an alternative way. We'll then review all self-reports of non-compliance on a case-by-case basis, as we are aware that there may be times that a landlord cannot comply with the requirement. For example, like the example, as Verity said, some landlords don't have a website. For your specific example, we would expect that if the policy states timescales that are compliant with the code, then the landlord would state that it is compliant in policy and include its current performance with commentary on how it is compliant in practice.
Lovely, thank you. And what sort of information are you expecting in terms of a qualitative analysis?
So similarly, we're not prescriptive, but it could include things like a narrative summary of the different types of complaints received, as well as including service improvements, any engagement with stakeholders, and if applicable, include insight gathered from focus groups, from tenants or anything like that.
Lovely. So reports to our board have a limit on the number of pages that can be provided. Is there any such limit to the number of pages, or is there a minimum requirement? Yeah, for example, the X number of examples for learning or service improvements per X number of complaints responded to.
So again, in terms of the report, we're not prescriptive on the format, and there is no template for landlords to complete. The only requirement is that it contains the information that we've covered previously, and also can be found on the FAQs as well.
I think it's worth picking up because this is something that is coming through quite a lot in a lot of the comments and the queries that we're getting, is that one of the things which we're really conscious of as an organisation is, whilst we absolutely have expertise in complaint handling, we do our own publications, you know, we do have all of that knowledge on the Ombudsman side. We're not experts in your own residents, and we're not experts on your organisations. There are over 1,700 landlords who are members of the scheme, and it's really important that you have the ability to use your own experiences, your own processes, and your own branding, for example, to be able to produce those reports in a way that's really meaningful to your residents and to your own stakeholders, which is why we're not giving anything which is you know, prescriptive or templated at this time. One of the huge benefits to having the duty to monitor in place is that we now will be able to review all of these reports and to be able to pull together the information to be able to share much better good practice, some really, really good practice examples. Just even hearing some of the discussions about the types of approaches that organisations are planning to take on these reports has been so interesting and really beneficial. We are running these sessions for large and small organisations, and I'm sure you can imagine that, you know, their approach will need to be very different. They won't have the benefits of scale. They will be very local. So there are points and opportunities to be learned across those different landlord groups that we have. What we will be doing is, through this work, we'll be picking up those examples of best practice that we see. We won't be issuing it initially, or I don't think we will be initially issuing it as best practice, so that all organisations are, you know, required to refer to or to pay mind to those. We will be sharing them as opportunities for learning and consideration. You may be aware that we also have powers to issue good practice. That was another power that was given to the Housing Ombudsman in the Social Housing Regulation Act. And to be able to publish good practice, we would need to consult with the sector, and that is something that we can absolutely do in the future, so that we are able to get your feedback, to consult, to make sure that what we're giving as good practice on, for example, the annual report, is actually meaningful and helpful to all organisations rather than just potentially the narrow view that we might see. So just wanted to highlight that because I know that it's challenging going into these new requirements in the first year. So yes, the guidance is quite top level. We've set minimum requirements. That's all we're looking for, and we will, build up that view as we see more of that information, and we'll make sure that we are able to support organisations. Sorry to jump in on that. I just know that it is something which is has been really coming up a lot in conversations.
Thank you. So, I mean, in terms of what you wanted to do, Verity, did you want to pick any out of the chat?
Yeah,
or...
I'm happy to pick out a couple of the questions which have come up in the chat. So one that I can see is coming up quite a few times is around tight timescales for publications, which it has come up quite a few times in terms of publishing the report for the 30th of June. And there are, I recognise that for some organisations they may have already decided on their meeting dates. I'm thinking particularly of local authorities with cabinet meetings and committee meetings and things like that. We recognise that they are planned out very much in advance. So we are expecting that report. We would, we do require that report to be published by the 30th of June. If that isn't the case, then when you are completing your annual self-assessment against the Complaint Handling Code, you would need to say that at the time of submission to the Ombudsman, this isn't compliant because the report hasn't been published. It will be published on X date, and that will be the date that the organisation will achieve compliance, because that's when the report is going to be published. As we've said, what we'll do is we'll review those as they come in. We are intending to look at all of those self-reports of non-compliance. That isn't to say that we would be viewing them as, right, that means that they're terrible and we're going to be taking action. It's to look at those reasons and to be proportionate about the action that we're taking. If an organisation has set a reasonable timescale and a reasonable action for achieving that compliance, we would notify them to say, thank you for confirming. We will be monitoring that to make sure that it is compliant. So we will be expecting evidence to be provided. And at that point, once it's completed, we would anticipate that organisations would then be able to update their self-assessment to say, yes, we're compliant with that provision now. As I've said, we are absolutely anticipating that there will be some organisations which are unable to do that for the 30th. But we will be looking at them on a case-by-case basis. I've seen in the chat there are various different, and it sort of shows really, doesn't it, the differences in the organisations that we have in our membership, that there are different arrangements in place. I've seen one talking about one organisation saying they do the reports twice a year. Some people do them in September, some people do them annually. So it will depend on those organisations. What we'll be looking at is to see whether the intention or the approach is reasonable and that the timescale is reasonable for achieving compliance in the first year. We'd also expect that organisations that aren't able to comply on time, publication timescales, we would expect them to be making arrangements to ensure that the timescales are achieved in the following year. So just highlighting that.
I've also noticed one that has actually come up in the inbox previously, but it's in the chat as well. So for local authorities, what is meant by the governing body? Is this our lead member or cabinet?
That would be the cabinet for the governing, which would be the governing body, and all organisations, excuse me, all organisations as part of the code are expected to have a member responsible for complaints. Apologies, local authorities. I know that means member is used significant amount in your world, but we have an MRC requirement, which is to sit at the board level. They will be the person that we would see as being responsible for ensuring that the self-assessment is being reviewed at the governing body level. On governing bodies, and I appreciate that hasn't come up in the chat, but just thinking about the publication, we have had some queries around, does the governing, does it have to list the names of everybody on the governing board, in the governing body? Can it be from an individual member of the governing body, etc.? We're not prescriptive on that. It could be from an individual, it could be as long as they're a member of that board. But whoever it comes from, whoever that has giving that assurance and that statement, it's expected that that is on behalf of the board, and that would need to be recognised as on behalf of the board. The reason for that is to really make sure that boards and senior leaders, executives, are really taking responsibility for ensuring that the complaint handling code is being complied with. Now, I don't know who, roles of everybody who's around the room. I've seen a few familiar names, so I know that there are some complaint managers in here. Anyone that sort of knows me, I was formerly in the sector myself. I was responsible for service delivery and complaint handling. It doesn't, the Ombudsman doesn't see that the responsibility for complying with the code sits on that operational person. It's really important that that is taken forward by the board, by the senior leadership team within organisations. So that's the intention there. So just to be really kind of clear on that, that would be what we would be expecting. Thanks, Danny.
Another one that I think we've come up, I think probably we've got time for one more, have we?
Yep, we've got time for one more.
Is a link to the determinations on the page, determinations page on the Housing Ombudsman website sufficient for sharing our own determinations with customers?
Yes, that would be fine for you to put the link through there. What would be really helpful if you are choosing to do it that way is that you just make it clear that it's being hosted on the website and that on the Housing Ombudsman's website, and that residents can then search for the organisation so that they can actually they can find your reports and the relevant information. I'd also encourage you to sort of include as part of that, saying that not all of our determinations are published. We state that ourselves, the reason being that there are times that we wouldn't publish something because of data protection and being able to identify an individual. The reason I say that is because from experience, residents may well go looking for their own report, and actually it might not be, it might not be there. That's fine, they can contact us and ask for reasons why, etc. But I suppose I'm preempting that residents may feel that you as the landlord should be providing those or providing that information to them. So just to highlight that on those. I'm going to pick up just one more in the chat. Apologies that we've sort of picked out a few questions from the chat as we've seen them and where they've been relevant. As I said, we will be responding to all of them. So if you haven't been answered, please don't worry. There is one that I just want to pick up on, which is we address complaints with residents for properties we're managing agents for. Do we report on these complaints, or should the housing association who we manage the properties for report on them? So it would be for the housing association that owns and that owns those properties to be providing those in their report. They are the landlord, you are the managing agent. Now, if you choose to include that in your own report, you are very welcome to do so, because you may choose to, depending on your arrangements. What we would expect is for that to be very clearly explained, that is actually not, that doesn't relate to your residents, it's to residents that you provide a service to. Just to clarify, that's about where we are trying to, aiming to be very clear about its services provided directly or indirectly by the landlord. So that is there. I'm really conscious of time and the need to for all of us to wrap up on time rather than getting stuck in one individual question. I can see that there are questions still coming in, which is great. Thank you very much. We will take those away to share with you. I just want to highlight as well, there's been some discussions about I think it's a Northern benchmarking group, which has come through in the chat, which hopefully is a very unexpected benefit to anyone that is interested in that. So thank you so much for sharing that. Apologies, I can't see who shared it, but thank you to whoever shared that. That's really, really helpful for organisations, I'm sure. So I hope that that's been useful session for you. We will make sure that you receive those answers to your individual questions. We'll also be reflecting on the key themes which have come through from this session and our session with smaller organisations, so that we can review and update our frequently asked questions on the website. When we do so, just so that you're aware, we will be making sure that the date of any updates or amendments are included, so that when we are doing any self-assessments, or if landlords were to look at the frequently asked questions, find there's been an update, then when that update has been made, and when we were doing assessments, we'll know also when we've made any amendments. So just to be clear on that. The last thing, and I don't think Anthea has put the contact details or the information for our evaluation form. Please do take a few minutes to help us by giving your feedback. This isn't about patting ourselves on the back and saying, yes, we're brilliant, we ran a webinar, everybody's happy, let's move on. This is about you having the opportunity to tell us what we need to do. Has it met your expectations? What do we need to do differently? And also, what can we run for you in the future? We're intending to continue running these webinars. The next ones which will be released will be focusing on the submissions process. They are available on our website. We'll be sharing the system, the form with you. You will be able to see it. We'll be running that as a live session for you. So that will be the next webinar that is available on our website to sign up for. So thank you ever so much for joining us this morning. I hope you have a really good rest of the day. Take care, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.